So thank you all. Before I ask questions, and I wanted to just cite, and I'll make sure that we send this out to you, that there's a link. There's a Harvard Business Review article, Help Your Employees Be Themselves at Work, and there's some pretty interesting stats that I think are really important for all of us who work, right? So that's pretty much everyone. But with regard to the LGBT community, basically 52%, the study said, 52% say that they feel that if they cannot be out and who they are with their many identities, but particularly that when at work, that their careers stagnate, that they don't advance in their careers. But it goes beyond people who identify as part of the LGBT community, because the Deloitte, who does a lot of work around millennial workplace issues, as well as published a study on uncovering talent, cited that 62% of all employees cover their identities. So whether you are a lesbian, whether you have particular interests, political views, somehow this masking of who you are as an individual, it doesn't compare to who you are in terms of some of the other issues, but I've had students come to me and just ask even some very simple questions about, well, I have tattoos. Do I have to cover them to work in this career? Will I get a job on the Hill? Will I get a job at an accounting firm, at a PR firm? Can I teach in a public school? So I think every day we're all wrestling with those identities. And one other stat that also as a parent who actually has a 27 and 32-year-old, two daughters who really are important to me, both NYU grads, by the way. But women in particular and parents feel up to almost 50% that if they talk about their kids at work, that somehow that identity is going to label them in a way that's going to not be helpful to their career. So these are pretty interesting and startling statistics, and hopefully I'll send you the article, but I do want to inform our discussion. So Patricia, if I can kick it off with you and sort of your vantage point, if you can just talk a little bit about what you think, if students are asking in terms of your journey and all the identities you mentioned, how do you, I mean, you're working for the Obama administration, you're working in government, but that may not be most people's story, of course. Mm-hmm. How do you manage those identities in the workplace? What challenges before you got to this position do you think that you thought were important and impactful in your career?
It's a great question. I had a bit of a different experience than I think a lot of people had, whereas I started my career in the nonprofit space out in the Bay Area, and nonprofit is very, at least out there, is very female-driven, and I had an opportunity to bring a lot of my identities to the table openly, and whether it was my LGBT identity or whether it was my politics, or I was really able to, right from the beginning of my career, sort of embrace bringing my identities to work. And I think that has framed my strong belief around the importance of being able to create environments to do that. So as a leader within an organization, as a senior advisor at the Office of Disability Employment Policy, what am I doing to ensure that our staff is able to bring their identities to their work, so that they're able to be productive, but also that it informs the policy that we're working on and it informs the work that we're doing. It was later in my career, actually, after going on the Obama campaign and coming to DC, where I started to learn some of the risk factors that I felt around being out as an LGBT person or bringing a certain component of my identity to work. So it was sort of like almost backpedaling a bit and trying to navigate a completely new environment. So I think it's also kind of knowing the environment you're going into and sort of navigating that for yourself and recognizing what how to navigate that. When you are able to feel safe enough to bring a layer of your identity to the table, one thing I would say is encourage folks to be intentional about it. I was intentional in my introduction around putting my identities out. That opens doors for other folks to do that. So certain, just sort of tactics that you can do to open doors for yourself and also open doors for other people around bringing your identities to work can be very valuable, not just for yourself and your success in the workplace, but for the value of the work that you're doing. If I'm at the Department of Labor working on disability employment policy, but we're not bringing the intersections around race or gender or sexual orientation to the table, when we're talking about disability, our policy is going to be impacted negatively. The inverse is that our policy is impacted in a very positive way when we're bringing the intersections of our identity to our work. So,
Brian, I'm going to ask you somewhat to address the same question, because also you had also a very corporate gig before coming to NYU, and sort of your take on this.
In terms of bringing my identity to work, so I've been really lucky. My first job was in a nonprofit theater. So there was, to the point around sort of nonprofit, bringing your whole self to work. And then going to American Express sort of after that. American Express is a great company, well known for its diversity and inclusion sort of program, and its approach it takes to sort of fostering that kind of open environment. So I was very lucky. I think my challenge was more internal to me. So probably in the most open of environments, which was the nonprofit theater, I was in the closet, didn't feel comfortable coming out. So it was one of these sort of personal reflections that I had to take for myself to say, not because the organization made it uncomfortable, but just for me, I wasn't ready, despite all the things that were possible from a nonprofit being open. And when I came to American Express, it was just more of at a time in my life where I felt comfortable actually to come out, and to your point, come out very intentionally, and have that be a talking point about not just randomly as part of my introduction, but more as I got to know people and build relationships, join affinity groups, that kind of thing. So it helped sort of accelerate my comfort level because I was in such an open environment. And ever since then, it's became a very intentional part of how I choose other employers. So when I came to NYU, I mean, this isn't a plug because this is an NYU event and NYU program, but I mean, that's one of the things that I really looked for when I was looking for opportunities after American Express is I want to go to a place that's going to foster where I was in my life and my comfort level, which is 100% bringing my whole self to work. So for me, it was more personal, less organizational in terms of sort of overcoming those challenges.
Okay. Hillary, if I could ask you to comment on obviously bringing yourself to work, that seems to be emerging, and what advice you would have for people in terms of identity and what your experience has been.
I mean, I think it's common that people say my experience might be unique or I was lucky or something like that, but I just think that you don't go apply for jobs at places where are homophobic or people get discriminated against or run by racists. I mean, I think you end up going to places where you see people who are visibly like you. When I ran the Recording Industry Association, I used to laugh with my staff and say, more gay people apply to this organization than any place in Washington. And I knew why. It was because of me and a lot of other people on our team who were openly gay. And so people thought, oh, this must be a good place for gay people to work. And I just think that that's where we are today. Companies that have a lot of people of color in leadership are going to feel better to younger people of color who want to get ahead because they're going to see that's possible. And every company isn't like that today. And fewer of them were like that when I was your age. And so I do think it takes more work to figure out where those places are. It takes more research, it takes more engagement, and it takes a little bit of chutzpah to kind of demand that for yourself. there's nothing wrong with being a pioneer, and every company that isn't good wants to be better. Some of them don't know how, and some of them, it's sort of, diversity is on their list of 10 things they'd like to do better at. And so knowing where it is on the priority scale, I think, for companies you're applying to is really important. I came out in college. But then I went back in after college and wasn't out and at my first job until the AIDS crisis hit. I had a sort of a epiphany moment where, and this is sort of a Washington story, the mayor of San Francisco was my client, Dianne Feinstein. And you would think San Francisco is your client. You could sort of be whoever you want or do whatever you want, but it really didn't even occur to me. I had a bunch of other business. And on behalf of the city, I was seeking AIDS funding. This is 1983. Just as the AIDS crisis was beginning, it hit San Francisco and New York first. And I went to meet with Senator Orrin Hatch, who you might know of as one of the most conservative, although certainly not anymore. In those days, he used to be one of the most conservative members of the Congress. And he looked at me, he's like, Hillary, what are you worrying about those people for? What are you doing this for? And I got sort of gobsmacked, like I couldn't believe he actually said that out loud. And I said, well, I am one of those people. And it blurted out of me, and I realized I'd just come out to kind of the most Republican senator possible. I hadn't come out to Dianne Feinstein. I hadn't come out to my boss who ran the firm, and I came out to Orrin Hatch, of all people.
Everybody's tweeting this, right?
And he knows this story. We have since laughed about it. But, so things happen in a moment. You kind of find you find your courage in little things, right? And when you do, life will be better. That's all. That's really the lesson of that story for me.
Robert, can I ask you to get the last word on this topic?
I just want to listen to them.
But if I could bring you back, and then I'll let you, if you could comment on again, identity in the workplace, but particularly maybe with your personal story.
Yeah, I'm still, thank you all for that. It was great to listen to. I'm still struggling with it. I own the firm. And
It's time you told your employees you're gay, Robert.
Yes, it is time. So I say that to say, not to have group therapy per se, but to say that identity it's a process. And it's a process internally, it's a process with your family, and it's a process as a culture changes around you, your sense of, you're not mutable, you're not one thing one day and another the next, or at least you shouldn't be as a values matter. But how you want to emphasize or talk about or think about aspects of your personality will change based on context. It certainly has for me. We have a work site where your identity is a part of the job. An enormous amount of what we work on is race, ethnicity, gender, bodily integrity with respect to reproductive rights or end-of-life care. And so it's not an unusual work site, but it's a special place where you are encouraged to bring this aspect of yourself to your work, and then all the problems that come with that, which is too much sharing and lots of conversation day in and day out about who we are and how we feel about that in the context of client services. So I think I raised that to say, it's interesting you raised HIV and AIDS. We developed, or practitioners developed, a very healthy frame over the years about safer sex. feels less talked about now, but the concept of, everyone wanted to know what you could do around HIV, what was safe and what wasn't. And well, actually nothing's safe if you're going to have sex. So there's a concept of safer sex. And I feel that way about identity in the workforce, that there's safer places, less safe places. There is no safe place. Even you alone in your room is not completely safe, because some of us have very complicated relationships to who we are. So the goal is to navigate your own compass. How do you identify? What is the importance of that? How comfortable are you in your skin? And all of that is about therapy and prayer and sort of your own ballast. Then the next question is, how do you want to navigate that, knowing that there are going to be all kinds of complications in the modern work site?
I'm going to ask this next question and have Hillary start us off, and then hopefully Robert can join in, and then we can go that way. You know, because Hillary mentioned it, and I sort of agree with it, about so many organizations, both profit and nonprofit, have a diversity and inclusion statement. And I don't know, there are some organizations that, you know, Brian mentioned Amex, that maybe are doing it well, but I think there's many others that are not doing it well. So could you talk a little about, in the work that you do for your firms, how do you help organizations navigate that through? And I'll just tell a quick story, since we're telling stories. Years ago in my role at NYU, I had a different job, but still in the career space. It seems, you know, we're still fighting this battle about parental leave and people taking time at work. And back then, students didn't ask for flexible work hours and working remotely and all other kinds of things that now are more common in the workplace. And students started asking about, they called it work-life balance questions. All of a sudden it started emerging, and a firm, a very large, in the top 50 of firms in the world, I said, how are you going to answer that for our students? Our students are really starting to ask those questions. And they said, and they held up a thing, we have a brochure about that. And I said, but does the firm really work with new employees and existing employees to really understand some of those challenges, and by the way, all the other things? And the answer was no at that time. So back to the question, are firms, you know, everyone has these diversity, as you said, among 10 on their list. Are there some really great examples, and do you think most organizations are starting to do it well, they're just getting it? What would you advise them if you're really trying to have an open and welcoming workplace that is diverse and inclusive? I know, big questions.
Well, we actually do, as does Robert, a lot of work with companies on their outreach and engagement. And I think, and we do that because we have sort of credibility on the nonprofit side with a lot of large nonprofits we work for. And so sometimes it's just creating a dialogue between the two. Sometimes it's just finding more diverse leaders and thought leaders for companies to talk to about how to do a better job recruiting, do a better job engaging. And other times it's simply helping them hold their own feet to the fire in a way that works for them. You know, PepsiCo is a client of mine, and they do a significant amount of outreach when they're selling soda and a little less when they're talking about their corporate brand. And ironically, their CEO is a woman of color, but she doesn't talk about it. And so they struggle with that. I'm not telling tales out of school. I think they've been more public about this than most companies. So what does a company like that need to do to convince communities of color that they're interested in not just fostering relationships, but recruiting, engaging, finding ways to bring in new talent from areas they haven't done? So some of that for us is what are the right media outlets and social media outlets that you can communicate through, and how you communicate that allow people to see something authentic that they can connect to. Some of it is, are you showing up in the right place and focusing on recruiting in the right place? And some of it is just aligning with, whether it's communities of color fighting for Voting Rights Act. Like, is that some place that you can go as a company that a lot of companies may not go to? I'm in another company that, where the, remain nameless, but the CEO called me yesterday and said that he needed help with a op-ed he was about to publish. It's going to come out, I think, in the next 10 days. Because he's never been particularly political. This is a CEO of a Fortune 50 company. Never been particularly political. But everybody talks about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and what Donald Trump says around politics. But they're not thinking about it from a CEO's perspective. He said, how can I support Donald Trump if he is talking about people and identities of people who work for me? I'm out there saying that the most important thing to us are our employees. How can I not go out and defend our employees' identities? This is a white guy. Our employees' identities in this nasty political environment. I have to say that Donald Trump is alienating not just a good portion of America, but a good portion of my company's employees, and that I can't abide by. And it's a totally different perspective, actually one that hasn't been talked about a lot in this campaign, that if we want to support our workforce, we have to support our workforce's identity, even in the political sphere. So, I think there are a lot of ways that this comes out, and particularly this year of all years, there are even more ways, as we've seen with this campaign, that this gets discussed.
Robert, can I?
The story she just told, I think, puts an important finger on the most important variable. Companies, not just companies, but organizations are diverse, generally speaking, when the leadership wants it to be. Said sort of as a matter of principle, it's actually not rocket science to do diversity inclusion in 2016 in the United States of America. We have the talent. So an organization reflects broad diversity in all of its gorgeous ways. People of faith, atheists, disabled, et cetera, when the leadership wants it to. And an organization is not diverse, it's not hard, it means that the leadership is not interested. So the most important conversation with an organization, if you have the privilege of working with people at the top, is an emotional one. Why do you want to do this? What does success look like? Are you going to live? Are you going to walk the walk? There's a tremendous problem in our country now where the leadership promotes the brochure, the rhetoric of inclusion and diversity, but all of the true signals they're giving to their employees or whatever it is, membership, is the opposite. The way they socialize, the composition of the board, who's rewarded within the organization, that's a disaster. So the best work that we get to do is therapeutic. It's what Hillary did on the phone with this CEO, is to talk through the emotional question of how you can go with your instincts, which is I want to do better. What does that look like? And sometimes it's confrontational, which is you're full of shit. And you're wasting everybody's time, and you're going to make people of color angrier than they are now if you're going to pretend that you're interested in inclusion, and you're frankly not. You're not devoting time to it. You're not going to reward managers by doing better, et cetera, et cetera.
Patricia, can I reframe it a little bit? From your vantage seat in your position now, do you see organizations and companies doing better in specifically not only the disability space, but in some of these diversity inclusion issues? Because you have a front row seat in many ways.
I think yes and no. I think it depends. I think to Robert's point, leadership is key. One thing that I've thought a lot about in thinking about this this panel and the idea of identity is, I think, one of the things that needs to happen, regardless of whether you have a brochure on inclusion and diversity or you have an intent, is that there needs to be a intentional decision somewhere within an organization to make a paradigm shift around what do you value around what does inclusion look like, and what do you value around around bringing identity to work. So often when what do we value in workspaces? We often value expertise. We often value education or experience. We don't necessarily often value or encourage people to bring their experience based on their identity, which then brings what insight. So I think there needs to be a shift and a belief within the organization that identity brings a real true value to the work that you're doing. And I think I can speak from my experience in the administration. From the president to being at the Department of Labor with Secretary Perez, who believes deeply in inclusion and diversity. And one of the things he says to us all the time, which he's not the only one to say this, but that diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And there's that distinction between, it's one thing to get people in the door, it's another thing to include folks. There's three things I think that are important in creating that culture of inclusion. One of which is create a culture where folks can bring their stories and bring their identities. And you can do that as a leader. You could do that as as a member of an organization. The other part is a culture that promotes the intersections of identity, and what is the value of the intersections of identity? So for myself, what is the value of understanding my internal intersections of identity, and then what is the value of me understanding how they inform my ability to interact with my colleagues or the work that I'm doing? And then the third is really sort of understanding how bias operates, and how bias operates in ourselves and in our organizations. And I think those three things for me, I think are important elements of how or you can think about really actionable ways you can create inclusion in your organization. One concrete example of something that we've done in the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and that I've led in ODEP and in some ways across the department, is we in response to the recent and ongoing community policing and loss of life, both police officers and community members, there was a real interest and desire and need for folks to be able to talk about what was happening and the connection to the ability to show up at work, and also how it informs our work at the Department of Labor. And one of the things we decided to do was we held dialogues, and out of the dialogues we started a series that it's a lunch and learn series, and it is titled What It Means to Live While ... And the conversation there started with some African American staff that talked about what does it mean to live and work while being Black, and talking about that in not just in the context of their own experience, but in the context of the policy work that we're doing, the intersections between disability and race, and really having dialogues where we can talk about those things. And now that series is building out to what does it mean to live and work while being an LGBT member? What does it mean to live and work with a mental health condition? So taking those, and there's two pieces to that. One is, how can it allow us to work more effectively together, and also how can we use our identities to inform the policy that we're we're working on. So this is one concrete example of something that we're doing at the Department of Labor, and specifically within ODEP, to have those real conversations about how we can better inform our work based on who we are.
Brian, I'm going to ask you a different question, if that's okay. But I do want to say that I think it is painful, and probably not doing a lot for productivity for people to hide who they are at work. I have a good friend who is a gay woman and works for a large pharma company, and all of her bosses are not are Donald Trump supporters, which clearly she and myself are not. And she can't be herself. She can't talk about politics. She can't really say who she is. And it's the churn that I think we all have, whatever your particular issue or identity is a better word. I think it does impact us because we bring that to every situation. So Brian, in that spirit, you have been so fortunate, and I've been so fortunate to know you in your different roles. So students, how do they bring their identity? What's appropriate for it to bring when they're looking for an organization to work for? Not only to Hillary's point earlier about choosing places that kind of speak to them in terms of what they're looking to do as far as work, but also they feel culturally. But how can a student represent themselves in a way so it's clear to an employer who they are in terms of with appropriate boundaries, in addition to their skills? I know.
Yeah, it's a
I'm
good
asking
question.
complicated questions tonight.
No, it's a good question, and I mean, it really depends on probably the organization and the spaces that organization creates that allow you to do that. Sometimes that'll happen sort of on a one-to-one basis. So if an individual is maybe not out at work, but is a friend with you, and wants to develop a relationship with you and have a conversation sort of with you about who they are, and they feel comfortable in that setting. So sometimes it's about sort of finding those individuals that you connect with, whether as a mentor-mentee, whether just as a peer and trying to create a dialogue. Sometimes there are affiliate groups, so organizations that do have those kind of like-minded sort of spaces within their organization that are all sort of existing to facilitate that dialogue internally and people to opt into those groups. So I think you really do have to figure out sort of the big part of it is identifying where you want to go in the first place and doing your research. And exactly what Hillary mentioned, sort of demanding that up front. You really owe it to yourself in the job search and the recruiting process to ask about culture, to ask about diversity, to see examples. Are you seeing people sort of live the brand? Whether that's sort of alums, whether that's people that you know, classmates who are working there. As you go through their recruiting process, it's a good indication if it's a diverse and open organization. Are you going to have the places within that firm to then be who you are at the speed in which, because it is an evolving sort of process. So you might be in one place, and as you evolve, figure out sort of different levels of comfort that you have. So. Yeah, it's a tough question to pinpoint. You need to do sort of X, Y, and Z, and you'll be fine. I think it really does depend on the organization, your comfort level when you're in that organization and that time of your career, and then starting small or going big. For me, when I came out at American Express, I went big. I had a gay boss. There was a gay affiliate group. I joined, got actively involved. There was an intern that I was managing as a part of the program who was not out at work, who came to me one-on-one and just had a conversation, and he was comfortable coming out to me, and we had sort of a conversation and struck kind of a mentor-mentee relationship as he was getting used to be in the firm, but that was where he was on kind of that cycle. So that's just, I guess, one example of sort of how you can sort of seek out to be authentic in different ways, but set yourself up for success when you're going through the job search in the first place, so you don't find yourself in a bad position.
I want to now turn it over to all of you, because I'm sure you have questions. I have lots of other questions, but I definitely, this is your time. So who has a question for, please, and could you just tell us your name, please? And
I'm Nicole. I graduated from NYU. sure this is on.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay. My question is actually for Brian. I've worked in the arts and currently in higher ed, and I'm looking to transition to a more corporate environment, preferably a global one. I was wondering if you could offer advice on kind of what your experiences and the major differences between working in your three settings were, and what advice you can offer to someone looking to transition from the arts and nonprofit to a more corporate environment.
Yeah. So yeah, I was an English major who wanted to be a screenwriter, working in arts education, and then I transitioned to American Express. And I would say, and that wasn't a conscious choice, but what I can definitively say is 3 years that I've spent working in performing arts are the reason why I was able to successfully advance in my corporate career. Things like standing in front of an audience and being able to tell a story, to communicate effectively, to have that presence. I've seen in intern calibrations, in interview calibrations, when people in corporate are evaluating whether or not they're going to hire somebody, especially at the undergrad level, where you don't have the experience behind you, but they're wanting to see your poise. Can you be articulate? Do you have a framework for talking about something? Do you have a point of view? Do you have a presence that makes people pay attention and inspires a level of trust and dependability? And so in nonprofit, you tend to be, at least the one I was in, I think by a rule they all are pretty lean. Your remit is pretty broad, and so you have a lot that you're responsible for. You have a lot to juggle. So from a multitasking, multiple stakeholders, figuring out solutions to problems where you don't automatically have funding or a lot of company resources to help you solve. All of those things, plus for me in the performing arts, it was a lot about that communication and presence that just really helped to differentiate me when I think, when I came over to the corporate space. I don't know if there's anything anyone would add.
Do you have another question? Okay, you have the mic. Okay, great.
Yes, I took the mic, sorry. My name's Grace, or Graciela. I'm a junior in Stern. I just wanted to ask if you, because I'm obviously Hispanic, but I'm from Miami, and we really don't focus so much on being people of color. Like, we never say that. We never really focus on our identities, I think, until we leave. And I was just wondering if you ever thought that, joining and being part of the LGBTQ community and focusing on, being people of, or being related to people of color, or all of those things, if you ever feel like those things are limiting in your identity, because obviously you might be members of the community, of those communities, but that's not the only thing, that's not the only part of your identity. And do you think it's important to let everyone, to put that at the forefront of your identity, when you do go to all these jobs? Or is it because it's the most important thing to you that you think that we need to focus on that?
Okay. I'd like to take that one.
Good question.
It's a great point, and I think in some respects, the older I get, the more relevant it is. But I think this goes back to what Robert said, which is, what does it feel like to you when you're alone? These issues really only matter if they will either hold you back or propel you forward, in a way. That to the extent that you feel grounded and feel centered around your identity, whatever it is, left-handed, right-handed, Republican, Democrat, gay, straight, Latino or not, the most important thing that will advance your career is, in my view, confidence. Like, if I could instill one quality in my children, that's what it would be. And because people will fuck up all the time, but if you have the confidence to know that you will screw up and the next day you will come back and go at it again and succeed, people are going to forgive you a lot. So in some respects, to the extent you walk in that room looking for that job, looking for that internship, and you're exuding the confidence that you can do that job and that internship, you're 60% of the way there, because most people don't project that. And so I think whatever part of your identity you put out there, because you need to, is that helps that confidence level, do it. And if it doesn't, if it's not relevant, leave it in the drawer for a while. It doesn't really matter.
The goal is for you to feel agency over your identity, for you to feel in control.
Yeah.
The majority of the time. None of us is in control of anything all the time, but the goal is to feel the majority of the time that the values that you ascribe to your personhood, whatever that is, are identifiable, they're strong, they're consistent. It's crazy making for yourself and others if you're a moving target. I'm Latino when I want to be, I'm not Latino when I don't want to be. I mean, you have the right to do that, but then expect that the systems around you don't know how to react well. But the goal is agency and control, and in order to do that, you have to have confidence, entitlement. I'll overshare. I'm however old I am. I'm 52, and I've been openly gay for a while, a long time. And I can't stand being the gay guy. So when people in our position, we get called a lot for money from politicians or whatever. We're putting together a gay event. A senator will call and say that, and I'm still a jerk about it because I don't have the confidence and the agency that I still should have. And I'll say, I don't want to be your gay guy. If you're going to slot me for anything, I'm a race man.
Well, that's a different level of confidence, actually.
Well, that I will talk to a senator like that is just a reflection of how many call for money. It's not about arrogance. It's about, it's a crappy system we have on privately raised money. But the point I wanted to make is I'm still struggling at my age, and I'm openly gay, and I have a great life and a family and all of that. I'm quite happy. But my identity question is still unformed. I'm happy to be gay at this point, and I'm not unproud of it. But I can't stand it when others assign that to me as my marquee. And I'm reacting about that. But that's life. And, to finish my group therapy with you, I just want to get to the point where I'm less hostile about it. I'm okay with my position. I just don't want to be angry.
There's we have a lot of women in our firm, and our, like I said, a significant portion of the ownership is women as well. And so I'm extra conscious, for instance, when I'm hiring now around young women and how different they are than young men frequently, and there are so many studies about this that it's not even funny anymore. But, this notion of if you have a list of 10 things you're looking for, and we do press, right? So if a guy comes in, he reads the newspaper, he knows press, right? Whereas a woman will come in, and if they haven't, pitched a reporter and written the op-eds and done the, communications plans or whatever, they're like, I'm not sure I'm qualified, but I'd really like to do this job. Whereas a guy like, I read the newspaper, so I know press. That constantly happens. Even today, when we try and do everything we can to push the next level of, what are you bringing to the table? So, I think the short answer to your question is just be whoever you want to be that makes you feel the best when you walk in that room.
Okay. Is there another?
Yeah,
Please.
I have the mic. Hi, my name is Grace also. And so, Patricia, I was really loving what you were talking about with the culture of inclusion and how that can be instituted in kind of a structural way. And I was particularly thinking about my kind of disdain for the lean in movement and how that places the onus on the person who's being marginalized to do a lot of the work. So I'm wondering how someone who is privileged in a certain identity can help someone who is marginalized in that identity in an interpersonal way in the workplace. And I have been thinking about this a lot recently because an article came out about Obama's female aides and how they, I don't know if any of you read it, but how they have tactics to support each other.
The amplification.
And I really loved that. Yeah. And I wondered if you had any, I anyone, not just Patricia, of course, had any particular tactics for being an advocate and helping people in an interpersonal way in the workplace.
Yeah.
Do you want to, since your name was mentioned.
Sure. Thanks, Grace, for bringing up. That's a great question. And I think one of the things I think that can be the most helpful is we're talking a lot about how we present or not our identities in the workplace. But what is our association with our identities? And I may have some levels of comfort with particular elements of my identity and not. And you brought up sort of how do you use privilege in it, in a way where you can then support other colleagues, or so let's give it a particular example within the context of what I shared with at DOL and the living and working while I bring a strong sort of racial identity as a white woman to work, to my personal life, to my family, and it's important for me to understand that element of my identity just as much as it is around my LGBT identity or another identity. And in the context of developing this series, one of the things that I did was I noticed that people around my office, particularly people of color in the office, had mentioned to me sort of the uncomfortability around the silencing that was happening around people not talking about what was happening around the loss of life that we were hearing about and everything that was going on across the country. And so I was spending time, and I was actually having a visceral reaction to the silence too. And reaching out to some of my colleagues of color and having conversations about what would be helpful for us in terms of all of our abilities to show up at work, and what would be helpful in terms of the work that we do. And it has to be both, because we're not just trying to be happy at work, we're trying to get somewhere. And together we were able to sort of build, and we were only able to do that because I bring my identities to work, and I have a general understanding of my identities, both flaws and limits, and my colleagues did too. So we were able, my African American colleagues, my male colleagues, my different colleagues, we were able to have conversations around what would these dialogues look like and what's the importance. So I think to your question, one of the things is really being willing to self-reflect and understand your own layers of your identity, whether it's how you may be targeted or how you may be privileged, and then being able to offer that to your colleagues in a way. But if you don't know or understand your own identity, you're not able to do that with other people as well.
Does anybody else want to add to that? Okay. I think one more question, and in the back? Okay, great. Hi.
Penny. I was wondering, you guys talked about sort of avoiding homophobic work environments to begin with. And say you're applying for a new job and you're looking into a new company. What if you don't know anybody that works there? What would be your resources for finding out about the culture there?
Do you want to?
Sure. So you're fortunate that you go to NYU and you are in a top tier school where companies are on campus all the time. So I think you show up, you hear what they have to say. Glassdoor is a great resource that's employee driven. So internal employees, if you don't know sort of who they are, so say you don't have any alums at some of the firms that you're targeting or organizations you're targeting, Glassdoor is an employee review site, everything from compensation to culture about the organizations they're a part of. So it's sort of an inside look. What else? Keep my mind churning, but I don't know if there's any that you want to add.
Well, the Human Rights Campaign has a corporate equality index where they measure corporations. That's on a policy and programmatic level. It doesn't tell you what your division is, what the division you're going to may look like, which is a problem at large organizations. It could have a great reputation. You can get bad luck and go to and vice versa. You can go to Hobby Lobby or Chick-fil-A and find a great manager and a great unit. But there are the resources they said, and HRC has a terrific measurement tool for corporations.
I think being really clear about what's important to you before going in. So if it's around, LGBT inclusiveness, then, you don't you may or may not out yourself in an interview, but you can ask questions around what kind of supports they have for employees, whether it's employee resource groups or, to try and get them to answer those types of questions. One of the things that's really important for me with any work environment is work-life balance, because I'm a single parent with a 2-year-old. So I can ask those questions. So getting really clear about what's important to you and formulating some questions that you can ask during the process that can maybe get to some of those things without then, having to
And just
name it.
to add on to that, so Brian said you're very fortunate to be at NYU. If you look at LinkedIn, there's over 275,000 NYU alum around the world on LinkedIn. If you don't know, there's a new student app that actually our office at the NYU Wasserman Center is partnering on, the new student app that just dropped. You can download it to your phone. There's so many NYU alums that you could, if you were interested in an organization, profit, nonprofit, government, and you were interested to know, listen, what it's, and find that they work there, and through the student app, you can actually reach people more easily, and that's part of the things that I think the intentionality of removing some of those barriers to the big profile, but being able to ask interesting questions and get some advice. And if there's so many alums out there that if you try to ask that question and don't get an answer, there'll be another one who'll be glad to do it. I want to thank the panel, but I do want to just give everyone like a lightning round. Obviously we ran out of time, but what one important thing that would you want these students to know about this area and about their identities at work that we didn't cover, that you just could give them one tidbit that would be important? So we don't have to go in order, but who'd like to go first?
I'll say, I only know it because I say it all the time. The question is not how do I avoid conflict and internal conflict, external conflict. It's accepting the fact it's going to happen. It happens all the time. You're aware of it. You're not aware of it. The question is, what are my values? What's my compass for how I'm going to navigate conflict or the unknown that will occur in any site? It happens in a classroom. It happens on the work site. So I want to alleviate or relieve you from the anxiety of, is it going to happen? Yes, it's going to happen. Yes, it's going to happen. That's what happens in pluralism. And so forget about that and just figure out what is my infrastructure, what is my support network, how transparent do I want to be about who I am, and what success looks like for me as a professional.
Great. Who'd like to go next?
I would just say I know it won't feel like this when you, for those of you who haven't gone out for your first full-time job yet, but nothing is permanent, and so there can be a conflict around whether or not someone will accept your identity. There can be a conflict about whether somebody's asking you to do something at work that you don't really want to do or you don't think is the right thing to do, or that there are 100 reasons why work can be uncomfortable. And every one of those will feel massively important in the moment, and kind of powering through that and figuring out who you are as you go forward, I do think is the right thing. And you're just not gonna love every day. It's just fact of life. And figuring out how to power through when you don't love every day actually is often as important as finding out how you're gonna find the place that's ideal. There are a lot of ideal jobs out there, but there are also a lot of, even in those ideal jobs, there are going to be less than ideal moments. And so not kind of taking each one of those moments as the do or die, I think, is kind of an important thing to recognize.
Patricia or Brian?
I'll just say, you all have to find your own sort of comfort level about how you bring yourself to work. If I editorialize that for a second, I would encourage you to be as transparent as possible. I know, and I'm speaking from my personal circumstance, I just felt enormously sort of freed to just show up every day and be that much better, just because I could focus on what I was trying to do at work. I could focus on a lot of other things other than trying to figure out the safe space to play in that wouldn't sort of give away any signals. And I think the time in our sort of culture and history is on your side. I think a lot of companies, if they're not already down the path of trying to figure out, organizations trying to figure out how to create a diverse and inclusive environment, I think they want to get there because it's good business. The marketplace, the world is becoming increasingly global, diverse. So connecting those two things to the success of an organization, whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's a corporation, you can help drive that change if it really matters to you and you really want to see the place you're in succeed. Or you can help take it to the next level and show up day one that much further along if you're in a place that is more accommodating. But I definitely encourage you to be transparent up front because it helped me tremendously, and I think it will help everyone.
Okay. Patricia, please.
I would just say, I mean, just the fact that we're here at NYU and you are all students or have been students, that having access to education, that you are hopefully going to have an opportunity to find work or a career path that you're really passionate about. And often those passions are directly connected to layers of your identity, and not necessarily identities that other people put on you, whether it's identifying with your racial identity or not, or sexual orientation identity or gender. But what those identities are important to you are probably going to inform the passions that you are working towards. So just getting clear about that for yourself, and then not having someone else dictate which identities are important to bring to work, but what identities are important to you. How does that inform what you're passionate about, and then how do you show up for work with that identity? Because when your passion and your identity is aligned with your work, that's where your work is going to just skyrocket. That's where you're going to be able to be the most successful, when you are working on something that you really care about. And so, getting to a place where you can do that, I think is great.
I just want to say, for me personally, I've learned so much and I have so much to think about. I really want you to join me in thanking this fantastic panel. They were lovely to be here. So for all of you students in the internship class, we're going to get to spend some more time together. So we're going to ask you to remain seated while other folks exit the auditorium back out. And again, thank you for being here, and we'll sit down.